there is something that has been here on Earth just as long as us, potentially longer, that has been guiding or socially engineering us for a long time, potentially. It's something to do with whatever these orbs are that people see, that they somehow play a role in that. They seem to perhaps come from the ocean, or there's some kind of connection to the ocean involved in that, and that they're responsible for a lot of divine encounters that you read about in religious texts. I do think there was an agreement between the American military and a form of non-human intelligence. Now, it's a pretty wild thing to say. When you look at some of the decisions that have been made from a military industrial complex point of view, some of the whistleblower testimony, there seems to be a lot of strangeness happening under the ground in the southwestern part of America. And you've got people talking about underground bases around Guadalupe Island. And then you've got like just the coast of like Puerto Rico and the Bermuda Triangle. Like there is a whole multitude of strangeness concentrated kind of around America.
No shade to anybody doing anything. I'm super stoked that anybody does anything. But I think you're doing something well that a lot of people are trying to do or wish they could do, where you're doing a combination of live riffing and then commenting on like whatever novel story or rabbit hole or terrifying instance or whatever. And you do it in a really fun way, man. And that's what drew me to your channel and drew me to wanting to have you on the pod. So welcome, my friend.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's an honor. Before I started creating, you were one of the many channels that I used to come to and watch. So yeah, to be here is awesome. To be connecting both of our purple caves together is a really cool thing too. And yeah, I'm stoked, man. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, purple esoteric resonance. And there's this idea in a lot of esoteric traditions that colors are associated with like certain deities or consciousnesses, and I don't know what purple is supposed to be, but now I'm like, what are we yanking on?
We're tapped into something.
On? We got the purples, we got the glowing orbs in the background.
Mm-hmm.
But given that you do, man, like you're hard, you work hard. You're like, I'll just wake up in the morning and I'll just open YouTube at some point, and inevitably most days you're streaming, so you're covering things in a sort of almost news-like capacity, not necessarily in a way that they're new, but you're always covering something new on the channel. But what things have you dove into rabbit hole wise that really stick with you, or really seem to have an impact on people that watch?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. It is kind of like a news set, but I generally don't try to follow the current news unless it's something I'm genuinely interested in, but I find a lot of the time I'm not. And there's also already enough channels kind of doing that content. And yeah, I kind of like to look into the past a little bit more and dig up the little nuggets that seem to almost sometimes tell a fuller story and a bigger picture of where we're at today. But these people are kind of just been, and some of this stuff is only from like the 70s and 80s, and it just seems to be kind of like lost in history. Mm-hmm, and I really like to just kind of revive that a little bit, give it a breath of fresh air. And because I think it's actually important to look back on that with the knowledge that we now have in 2025 with, where the conversation is at now. I often find when we look back at some of these people, they are seen in a bit of a different light. Sometimes for the worst, but often not, often for the positive. And that we realize that back then these people just got laughed at, but it kind of lines up with a lot of the things that we hear today. In terms of recently, I think the big one that, the big one that really kind of gave the channel a bit of a catapult was the video that I did on Billy Corgan's story about seeing a shapeshifter, which was a real like investigative journey for me. And that's what I tried to do with the video, is kind of like after I did my own little deep dive, I kind of wound it back to the start and just presented the way that I went through it. And I guess that style really resonated with people. But that kind of took me down this road of like learning about satanic ritual abuse and the cult of Baal and who Baal is and how far that it goes back and how it may exist in society today. And, that's another whole can of worms. But when you look into that topic and the whole satanic ritual abuse thing, it does seem very prevalent. It seems very real. And that's probably something that weighed on me a lot recently. And I never intended to even talk about it after that video, but it got such a positive response that I was like, okay, people obviously want to hear about this. And I guess it makes sense to follow it up a little bit. And I was curious too. But I did find that after a few days of covering it, and you know, it could have been a combination of things, of maybe just me naturally not being in the best headspace anyway. But after looking at that kind of stuff and feeling the weight of the reality of it, I was like, man, I feel like I need to just not talk. I don't want to consume this in my mind for just at least a week or so, because I just want to like breathe some fresh air.
Yeah, man. I'm so glad we're starting out on a light note, like satanic ritual abuse. But no, it's so let's actually, dude, this opens up so many fun and again terrifying rabbit holes and things that I think we should approach with nuance, because let's just Socratic method this shit. So, you know, steel man it, straw man it, all of it, because so you're familiar with like the satanic panic thing, right?
Yeah.
How there was like all of these accusations of, you know, these like satanic murders, satanic abuse, and then these things were more, and people, as you would imagine, got behind it, right? Like, oh my God, this is the most evil, terrible thing ever. It, you know, it evoked everybody's religious fervor. It became this big thing, and like I think it was like the early '90s, maybe
Yeah,
late '80s in the
yeah.
US.
It was like late '80s. I'm pretty sure is where it began.
Yeah, yeah. And then now, from a modern POV, a lot of people look back at that and they say, you know what? This was more of a psychological boil over of the zeitgeist than it was anything real, than it was any like widespread satanic abuse. And while I think that that is true, if we take yet another step back and just ask ourselves obvious questions. Are there people out there doing dark, occult, abusive shit in the world? Of course there are. There have to be. And the idea that there's not, just because, you know, yeah, like the satanic panic was a thing. There were false accusations made. People's fear and religious fervor, of course, gets the better of them and makes them act irrationally, and want to just like, you know, persecute anyone who's like dressed like a goth and wearing eyeliner or whatever. Like, yeah, of course, that's true too. But also the idea that there wouldn't be occult ritual abuse or occult, you know, dark occult shit going on. I don't think we should go that far. I think we should realize that, yeah, that's been going on forever. And why would it not be going on now, at least in small localized circles?
Yeah, exactly, man. And the thing is, like, when you look at the satanic panic stuff, and like on my show, I looked at interviews, like there was one on Oprah,
Yeah.
talking about how her family, they actually worship this entity called Baal. And these people were saying during the satanic panic, late 80s, early 90s, and we are now, you know, nearly 30 years down the road from there, and there are people saying the exact same story. And what is so you can only assume that in that 30 odd years, this has not only been ongoing, but likely spreading, right? Because that's generally what happens. Maybe that's an assumption, but it's still there, right?
Yeah. And let's also again, let's ask a couple just common sense questions about this. So, common sense question 1. Why would this be going on? You know, because I'm always incredulous and like, oh, people are just evil. Maybe, kind of, maybe there's somewhat of a nuanced conversation to be had there. But what I think is more likely is one of two things. One, something works. There's a suppressed, scary, but real, practical, esoteric, occult technique out there that somehow creates power or something
Yeah.
out of doing this stuff. That's one possibility. The other is that it's a way to manipulate people, kind of like Epstein influence type. And maybe with Epstein, it's both, right? Like maybe there is an
Yeah.
unseen, like spooky dimension to it. And maybe it really is just a way to um, honey trap every powerful person in the world. And now you have them in your back pocket in a way where you're all co-compromised. Because I was thinking about this the other day. It's like, man, maybe the reason in a lot of these like weird initiations, it's something like that, is because you're all compromised together.
Mm.
So you all have to have each other's back if push comes to shove. And there's utility in that, right? There's social utility in that. So there are reasons why these things could be happening, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like if you, like you sort of mentioned about how everyone becomes compromised together, and these, based on testimony and survivors who have spoken out about it, it's happening in like the rich and the elite circles, and it's almost like if you want to get to that level or that status, it's like you have to, if you want to be in this club, you've got to go through the initiation, otherwise you're not in this club. So yeah, I actually think a lot of that, like I think multiple things can be true at the same time,
Right.
and I think that's probably what we're dealing with when it comes to this stuff. And I also think that that's the one of the big problems with disclosure, because I feel like this whole, esoteric belief systems that do work, that actually have some kind of role in reality, that's part of disclosure. Like that's
Yeah.
like full disclosure. But so is the existence of a non-human intelligence, probably multiple. So is the technology that comes along with that. Like disclosure, if we are really talking about the whole thing and how all the pieces fit together, I think we're talking about a lot of different things. And yeah, I think the esoteric belief systems and teachings are probably a big part of that.
Yeah, I think it has to be. And there are major hints emerging, right? And again, we have to, like, if we're gonna do the red yarn and corkboard thing, we gotta follow all possible paths for the red yarn to go. And of course, all the time in this conversation, one of the paths is disinformation or controlled at a minimum, like narrative control, right? At a minimum. And so I just wanted to say that before I say what I'm about to say. What I really want to say is that what you're pointing to now really starts to perk my wonder whiskers up, because it starts to evoke like the testimony of Matt Brown. It starts to evoke like what Barber is talking about with the psionic angle, in that, you know, there's a whole sort of suppressed worldview at play here. It's not just UFOs and weird stuff in the sky. It's the idea that your consciousness has hidden abilities or latent abilities, and that those are being kept from us. It also trickles into the technology sector, right? Like there are these ideas that we all kind of, in the modern consensus reality, our modern understanding of what's real and what's not real. They're ideas that, if you look at the ancient world, were just pervasive practices among practically every spiritual group. One of them was sacrifice.
Yep.
We look at that now and be like, that's crazy. That
Yeah.
can't be real. How would that even, that doesn't make any sense. The Greeks thought it made sense. Every,
The
I mean,
Mayans.
the Mayans thought it made, I mean, you could literally list, you could just go down a list. I'm not aware. It seems like there's a certain point where it was just a pervasive practice in the ancient world. Egyptians, obviously, like, I mean, just everyone.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's
And
crazy.
you will find some stuff, among, like, by the time you get to like, um like Pythagoreans and Platonists and like all of the, all of these kinds of different schools of Greek philosophers sort of debating the merits of animal sacrifice and stuff like that versus, not. But you wouldn't find those debates unless it was like pervasive among society, right? And that's one of the most terrifying ideas, dude, is that it works. Is
Yeah.
that you really do supplicate or connect with non-physical entities through the technology of sacrifice. That's kind of a terrifying idea,
Yeah.
And what's even more terrifying is like maybe in some versions of it, it's not evil. Like maybe you really can. I don't know. Again, I don't even know if I want to keep this in because this is so. I don't even know what I think about it. But
yeah, I mean, it's like,
you,
I think to stay like super, like, if we just, for the sake of a thought experiment, remove any sort of like human emotion from
right?
this conversation, it's interesting to wonder if the true nature of reality does involve like some kind of sacrifice to serve a genuine purpose in like developing knowledge, or like enhancing the quality of life for a group of people. And that now society, or humanity, has just gotten so big that the circles that are still doing this stuff are now, it's just like the inner circles, and we've almost just spilled out beyond our boundaries, and the people on the outskirts just aren't included in this sort of esoteric occult knowledge that has been here since like the beginning. But when we put the human emotion in that, it becomes absolutely horrifying, because it's like, well, what kind of world is this? But
Right. What?
I'll finish that
Yeah.
quickly and just
Yeah.
say, I think it's important that we remember that there's like a polarity in everything, right? And that if there is, if there is this esoteric school of knowledge that includes dark things, or things that feel dark to us, there must also be a lighter side to it, and that there
Yeah.
is a positive way to interact or communicate with another dimension or a non-human intelligence that doesn't necessarily involve sacrifice or horrible things like that.
Totally. Yeah. And that's one of the things that really gives me hope about this new wave of what's going on in the sort of narrative around disclosure, is that all of these, psionic people, in air quotes, who talk about connecting with these non-physical entities. One, most of them say it's not aliens. Most of them say you should be thinking about this in more of a spiritual context. So there's connection point number one. Number two, they're always talking about projecting loving kindness. They're always talking about like you communicate through the heart. You can't fake it. Like if you want to resonate with what this frequency is, there you really need to be like in a state of projecting that energy, embodying that energy, and
Yeah.
that's what makes these things show up. So that gives me hope. That gives me hope that we're evoking the right things. And as crazy as this might sound to people who just have not put a lot of thought into this, or who like this is so far outside of their understanding of consensus reality, if you start going down these rabbit holes of what does it really mean to explore the notion that you're more than your physical body, let's say, you're going to find similar ideas of resonance, ideas of whatever state you are in is the state you're going to find yourself in this consciousness realm, right? Because as long as we're in localized bodies, I'm trying my best to connect these thoughts because it's making sense in my mind, but I realize I need to do a little verbal work to get there for the audience.
No, I'm with you.
When you're in a body, right? And you are having a localized emotional state, it's contained within you. But if there is a realm that is non-local and is consciousness based, and you free yourself from your physical body, let's say, a la Robert Monroe, and he's a perfect example because this is what he says in Journeys Out of the Body, is if you're in a state and then you happen to find yourself out of body, you're going to go to whatever that state is. You're going to go to the part of the consciousness universe or whatever you want to call it, that resonates with what you're believing. So if you're fearful, you're going to be amongst fear. If you're horny, you're going to be amongst that energy. So you need to almost find a way to cleanse yourself of all of those emotional influences if you want to have control, if you want to be able to navigate. And that makes a strange amount of sense to me.
Yeah. 100%, dude. 100%. I think like the key to society kind of collectively elevating, and like our collective consciousness actually ascending. I think ascending is a better word than progressing, because I feel like it literally does need to lift upwards to progress. I think people need to understand that about those emotional frequency charts are just such a classic example that I think people need to look at and start to really wrap their head around, because I do believe that, yeah, the reality, your individual subjective reality, is like a mirror of who you are, and like how you, like your belief systems, your thoughts, the way you see things creates the world that you live in individually. So, like you said, when you're in those like low vibrational states, you're going to have a low vibrational experience if you do happen to go out of body. Or, I mean, to keep it simple, if you are in a low vibrational state and someone cuts you off in traffic or something goes wrong in your life, it's going to feel like a personal attack, and you're going to get angry, and you're going to react. But in a high vibrational state, you're probably going to be a lot more empathetic. You're going to have a lot more understanding and think, you know what, that guy's probably just running late for work. This has got nothing to do with me. Let him in. You know what I mean? I think if people can start to realize that we actually all have a choice on how we handle every situation in our life, and that, we're not victims of our circumstance. We actually create them from the state of frequency that we operate from. And I think if we could begin to grasp those ideas, not only would I feel like collectively our consciousness would rise, but I feel like this idea of like other dimensions interacting with us might start to make a little bit more sense. And it might, I think, push the needle a little bit closer to actual disclosure. Because I do think that I feel like it's a cheesy term that gets said a lot. Disclosure comes from within. But when you start to like think about these concepts and how, I mean, you saw that I played a clip earlier on my stream of Carl Nell saying, like, Western esotericism and these sort of schools of thought are sort of like the foundational push for scientific discoveries. Like, it's based in esoteric systems. So I think as much as people don't like the woo, this stuff is important to begin to like wrap your head around, because it is the next step.
Yeah, I would like to pivot into him, but before I do, it's funny because you said it's sort of cheesy to say disclosure comes from within, and I also think talk of frequencies and vibes and all of that shit is cheesy, but I think it's directionally correct.
Yeah,
Like
100%.
those emotional charts you talk about, where it's like this many hertz, this many vibe. That's all bullshit. That's all made up numbers that somebody pulled out of their ass. That probably someone like typed into Chat GPT or whatever, and then it made an image for them. But it's like directionally correct.
Yes, the numbers are just whatever. Like, that doesn't mean anything. You don't have a tool to measure them, but the idea is very real. And I speak from like a firsthand experience, because I feel like my life has changed dramatically from when I was, say, like 19 years old. Like, my state of mind, and that's changed the world that I live in, because I used to see the world in a far different way. And once I started to realize that I actually have control over those things, my life changed rapidly, rapidly. So now that I've like experienced that firsthand, it's kind of like it shifts you from a belief to knowing and truly understanding the power of like some of these ideas.
Yeah, and I would posit one of the things that probably also shifted that greatly for you is, and admittedly this is an idea I'm very biased toward, is the sort of stepping into your own uniqueness and choosing to become a creator and expressing your being in that way, our a la Carl Jung initiation. And I think that if you dig into older esoteric traditions as well, they're all sort of hinting at this idea. And weirdly, this actually kind of gets into some of the like out there, speaking of dark stuff, like Michael Aquino stuff, even at least later in his life. This idea of stepping into what only you can do, essentially, right? Like Jung called this individuation, that there's this sort of call from what he called nature to become who you are, right? And you become who you are usually by stepping off the well-worn path, usually by doing something scary, usually by doing something creative, usually that requires you to be in dissonance with what your family expects from you, with what society expects from you, to do something that does not make sense on paper, right? Like, and this might not be financial. It might not be a living. I mean, I think we think of that in modern capitalistic uh, Western world or Australian world terms because that's what everyone's doing. Um, but I think what it really entails is figuring out okay, I've got this nebulous calling within myself. I've got this nebulous dis-ease within myself. How do I turn that into something productive that only I can do? And I think you're starting to do that with your channel. So I would imagine that those two things probably coincided for you. You probably started feeling that when you started stepping more into your own creative energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was sort of like one of the later steps in it, but one of the
Mm.
bigger ones too. And I think naturally, like anyone else, I'm sure you've experienced this. There is like a fear of
Oh yeah.
putting yourself out there, especially talking about the topics that we do, right? Because you're not just worried about like what people will think on from just like a creative perspective, but you're sort of like, what are people going to think about my mental health? I'm talking about UFOs and summoning the Scarlet Woman in the desert and stuff like that. So you you have this kind of like mental prison that and this is what I discovered. And when I feel like I broke out of this, it was honestly like one of the most liberating things in my life, because I was worried about what people would think, but the people I was worried about were like my friends, like the people
Yeah.
who would be close to me. I was worried what they were going to think of me. And then I just knew that this feeling inside me was pushing me and pushing me to do this. So I just said, I don't care. I'm just going to do it. And then when I realized that there was literally no one that said any of the things that my brain was telling me they would, and it was just such a light switch moment in my mind that I was like, wow, I was literally paralyzing my creativity, crippling myself from doing anything, from thoughts that my own mind had created that were not even true. And I was so stuck by them that I wasn't doing anything. And once I just pushed it aside and did it, I realized how I created that myself. And from that point on, I've kind of just been not listening to the over analytical voice that's always going in my head and like following my purely just intuition, because I feel like on this journey, I have learned to be able to tell the difference between like that guiding voice and
Yeah.
the analytical voice that's analyzing every single move that you make. So
Yeah.
choosing which one to listen to has been a big win for me on this journey.
Yeah, man. And you know what? Conversely, I mostly agree with everything you said, but conversely, I think I have lost friends from traveling the path that I've traveled. And I do spend a lot of my time locally, at least where I live, editing, grinding, doing my thing. I do have friends here, but not nearly as big of a friend group as I had in my 20s. And guess what? I have way cooler friends now. Like I lost a lot of friends that we were only bonding over like going out and talking shit and goofing. Um, and now I have friends that are into the same things as me. And those few friends, they are just like, even if I only see them in person a few times a year, the level of understanding that you have with other people who do the things you do and are interested in the things that you're interested in, particularly when they're things that go right to the core of what it means to be a human being and the biggest questions there are that orbit around the human experience, those friends are worth like 10 douchebags that you go out and drink with. You know, like
100%, man.
it's just so soul nourishing, man. Like,
Yeah.
and meeting, like hanging out with those people, having deep conversations, hugging each other, telling each other you love each other, like that means so much more, man. It means so much more. So yeah, you might lose something, but I think what you're going to get in the long term by following that kind of a path, and I don't just mean conspiracy rabbit holes at all. I mean like following your true you know,
Your
what
calling.
yeah, your calling, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
what Joseph Campbell called your bliss, right? That's what it is. Jung's individuation. It's the same thing. Whatever that is for you, you know?
I remember when I started doing this and I started putting up videos, I could feel that I genuinely felt like I, the best way I can describe it was like I was vibrating, but obviously I wasn't
Mhm.
I wasn't actually shaking, but it was like the energy and enthusiasm that I had for making content and putting these videos up was not only just something I had never felt before, but the fulfillment it gave me in the early days, just getting a few people who would comment on my videos and just say something nice or say that it resonated with them or that they learned something. It was like this feeling of just like, dude, this is what you are meant to be doing. And that's why I kind of just grabbed it and was like, all right, like I've never felt more fulfilled or happier doing anything in my life, because I felt like I came out the womb with like a disdain for society and like
Yeah,
working a 9 to 5, dude. Like it's just been
totally, man.
wired into me that this can't be the right way to be a human being. So when I finally found something like this where I can kind of spread that message, help other people learn and understand it, and also make money, which unfortunately, some people get weird
Yeah,
when
of
you say
course.
that,
Yeah.
but like I couldn't do it if otherwise I'd be on the street. Do you know what I mean? So it kind of is important, unfortunately. But when you find that thing that you're passionate about and it all just kind of comes together, it's a beautiful thing for sure.
Yeah, man. People who don't understand that this is also a job, right? Like
Mm.
like you and I both aren't just like sitting here vibrating in pure bliss like 1,000% of the time that we're editing, that we're doing. Like it's still a grind. It's still, times where it's not easy. It's still a hamster wheel. There's still days you don't want to do what you need to do to get from point A to point B, point B being hitting publish. It's still soaked in all of that. So it is a job. But
Yeah. It's different though, right? Like, boy,
totally.
for me,
Yeah.
just know it. Like, dude, when I used to get on the bus every day and go to work, I would be sitting there just like looking at everyone on their phones, looking miserable. And I'd be like, look at us in this little can of sardines going to work.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
bro, like I was not, it just bothered me on like a very deep level. So just now, and I'm not even like trying to be like someone who's super rich and like a huge YouTuber. Just the fact that I have enough money to live and get my freedom of my time and life back and sort of do this on my own terms is worth more to me than like a paycheck, because I feel like I actually am in control of my own life, not this system where I'm in debt and I owe money and I have to keep coming to get my money to pay the debt, and then I get 2 days to kind of recover and go back and do it again. Yeah, that means a lot to me.
Yeah. Would you rather be a battery for someone else's wealth or for your own
Exactly.
evolving
Yeah.
maturation? You know, e- anyway, I do want to pivot into this Colonel Nell lecture that I just watched a little bit of that you were talking about on your channel, because again, it elucidates how it's not just weirdos like us talking about this stuff. And there's a double edged sword to this, right? Because if there's disinformation, this is the mouth of disinformation. This is a colonel in the United States military talking about this stuff. Um, but that's not the sense I get from him. The sense that I get from him when he talks is, I mean, so it's funny, man, because in the little chunk of his talk that I watched, it's one of those that you're like, this guy watched my podcast? Like, what the hell? He's talking
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
consciousness. He's talking about non-human intelligence. He's talking about everything from Penrose and Hameroff's Orc OR theory of consciousness to the really out there topics like the relationship between the esoteric and technology and the UAP phenomenon. Um, so that's hugely interesting, man. And
Yeah.
either, you've got, again, let's trace out both paths of the red yarn. Again, you either have to be like, wow, this is some weird disinformation. This is some weird informational 4D chess they're playing here. What the hell's going on? Or there's at least a kernel of truth in it. No pun intended. Um, like he really does believe there's a relationship between consciousness and the UAP phenomenon. He really does believe that human consciousness is not just a artifact of the human brain, and that's pretty goddamn interesting. That a colonel in the U.S. military is sitting here at Rice University giving this lecture, right? So it's harder and harder not to think that there's really a there, and that all of these things, technology, the UAP phenomenon, reality itself, consciousness, it's getting harder and harder not to think that there's a there. And especially when you have these elite people. And I'm not saying elite in the Alex Jones way, but but elite in like, this dude's smart. This dude's at a very high position.
Yeah.
And he got there through his intelligence, clearly, when you hear him talk. So man.
Dude, Colonel, deeply involved in intelligence, Northrop Grumman as well. So, not a, and I get the same.
Know that. That's interesting. Yeah.
Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that. There's zero doubt.
I like to try and read people because I feel like I'm kind of good at it. And even when it's just online and in a video, I feel like there are lots of signs when someone's speaking. And I think a lot of it is not even physical. It's like a feeling that I kind of say it's like the result of a calculation of micro expressions, the cadence in their speech, the tone of their voice, the body language, the things that they're saying. All of these little tiny things that just kind of get calculated very quickly in real time. And it gives you this feeling of the way someone, of how truthful someone is when they're speaking. He has always come across as very truthful to me with good intentions. And the fact that, he's referenced that Miguel Alcubierre's theory of faster than light travel. He's mentioned that many times, that he's saying that these esoteric schools and belief systems are sort of the forefront of innovation. And he's referencing Jack Parsons. He's referencing, he's referencing Tchaikovsky, and even like Hermann Oberth, German rocketry, is famously quoted for saying, "We cannot take credit for our advances, for we have been helped by the people of other worlds." So you've got these three, you've got Russia, Germany, and America, all early 20th century. The father of their rocket programs are all in their own way, in their own frameworks, are talking about how communicating with some non-human intelligence or some people of other worlds has led to their advancements in rocketry, which is extremely interesting in its own right. And especially when you come to today as well, you hear about this mysterious Tim Taylor figure who apparently also does the same things, right? He says it's like yoga and diet and meditation and whatever, but he gets these downloads and he's done multiple successful, like, patented technologies or business ideas that have, sold for millions. So when someone from the intelligence, Army Colonel Northrop Grumman, is telling us these things, I kind of think it comes back to what we were saying, is like disclosure is actually about learning about consciousness, going within, learning to like shift your mirror. Okay. If reality is a mirror, we need to kind of shift out of the state that we are in to create a new one. I don't think it's the disclosure that people want, but it seems like the one that it kind of seems like the one that we're getting, especially when you look at like the whole Jake Barber thing about not just psionics, which was super interesting, but where he's talking about this loving, divine, feminine connection with a craft. And that, I actually went back and watched his interview the other day because I kind of did I did a little recap on how Skywatch has just kind of gone a bit silent. And he was saying that he feels like that entity or that energy is still with him today, and that it's guiding him, and that it's kind of pushing him along on this journey. And I think a few people have even been quoted for saying like disclosure is in the hands of a or the non-human intelligence, which is interesting in itself.
Well, that's always true, right? Because it could just reveal itself at any time, and either you're going to be like convinced of a different reality, you're going to be labeled as schizophrenic, but it is a type of disclosure. And when you say that it's the type, maybe not of disclosure people want, but it's what they're getting, what I'm guessing you mean, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is that it's a kind of disclosure where it doesn't fit neatly into the pre-established narratives that people thought of, oh, there's a secret cabal that knows everything. It seems more like they're aware of these threads, and they might be aware of specific things that we're not aware of, but they don't know everything. There are still lots of mysteries. They don't necessarily know what the best words for these things are. But they seem to be aware that there's another presence here. They seem to be aware that there are these crafts. There seems to be, is that what you meant, or what did you mean by that?
What I was really sort of meaning is that I think people want disclosure, and they want to know, where are the UFOs? How do they work? What aliens are here? Which ones? And what are they doing here?
Right.
But it feels like, it sort of seems like it is really steering towards the idea of consciousness and learning about your consciousness and elevating your frequency. And like that seems to have maybe it's shifting more towards like an interdimensional intelligence is going to be the disclosure. Now, I mean, I could be wrong. But I think whatever it is, because I agree, if we're talking about interdimensional things like this, that they probably don't know everything. And I would say that's understandable, because we're talking about things literally in other dimensions. Like, how can we fully grasp it? But I do think, like, again, there's probably many facets to disclosure. And I do think that there is also probably physical beings that can exist in our dimension that are not human, and they are intelligent, and that maybe they live under the ground. I don't know, under the oceans. But I think until they come out and say, okay, we've been kind of covering this up for, nearly 100 years. This is why we did it. This is why it felt like a good idea at the time. These are the acts and agreements that were signed into place at the time that really made this hard to come out for a while. This is why we've decided to change our minds. Here's the whole backstory on why this happened and why it was a good idea in the first place. But now we want to help progress forward and change things. There needs to be accountability first, because until there is like an admittance and like an accountability, no one, or at least collectively, we are not going to trust what they say. And we shouldn't. I think like we owe that to ourselves not to, because it's like the boy who cried wolf. We know that there's a cover up, like that's obvious. So I'm not going to believe anything more you say until you first admit to that. And, it's okay. Tell me why. I'm not going to be mad as long, if, at the end of the day, the people who did it aren't really alive today. It's kind of been handed down generation to generation. So it's not like these people can be held directly accountable, but just some explanation as to like how we got here and why, so people can go, okay, fair. Probably went on a little bit too long, but I can understand why they did it back in the day. Let's, start being a bit more transparent and let's move forward. That needs to happen before like any disclosure is collectively accepted, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so difficult, man, because while I do gravitate toward this, whatever you want to call it, sort of consciousness-based, interdimensional, crypto-terrestrial, ultra-terrestrial sort of arguments, I don't know. Like to me, it seems kind of, I don't know, on the nose and old school sci-fi to imagine that there really are beings that got in a ship and flew here and look like like anthropomorphic reptiles, or look like what, like that's harder for me to swallow, but I don't know. And when you hear people like Eric Davis talking about like there are these different races, they are here.
Are they multiple species? Are they like, what was their size? And how many are usually on a craft?
They're typically the multiple species people familiar with the Greys, the Nordics. People are talking about reptilians and insectoids. It's not that they're reptilian or insectoids, it's that they resemble to the recipient of reptile or insect type humanoid, because they have this head and forelimbs and torso.
And admittedly, there's nuance there. I don't know if this is what he's saying is a commonly held belief, or that he really personally has knowledge of. Who knows? But I don't know. And that relationship between whatever is physically here and these craft and this other narrative is one of the most perplexing to me that I often wonder about.
You've done some time at the Monroe Institute, haven't you?
Yeah.
Have you, either through, gateway tapes or maybe through other methods, have you felt like you've ever had some kind of spiritual or, connection or download from something that you can't really explain, or something that feels like it's, connecting with you?
I wish I could say yes, man. Like I had a great experience at Monroe. There's nothing spooky or clandestine or that feels like an op whatsoever. It's just, so what was cool for me too is, there like people like Chris Ramsey and a couple other people I know have gone to like creator retreats where it's only other creators who are there. I went to a normal retreat that I just got added onto because there were no creator retreats or whatever coming up. So you're just spending time, man, with a couple dozen people who, most of them are older. Most of them are like retired. They're teachers, they're firefighters, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're whatever. Few younger people. And it was just beautiful, man. Like you do your meditations, you're meditating like 4 to 6 times a day. You're putting these headphones on, you're going in the dark, you're going deep, deep, deep within your own mind. And some interesting stuff does happen. And sidebar, my biggest goal going to this retreat was not to go out of body. Like a lot of people go there to try to achieve this out of body state. I did want to connect with higher intelligence, like my personal daimon or guide or whatever, because that's one of actually the primary goals of a lot of esoteric traditions, is that you already have this higher thing attached to you. That's just you've forgotten how to communicate with. And if you can open that communication channel with, like, that is the way that you really start to progress. That was my goal. I did not have that direct experience. It was much more subtle. It was much more mind's eye. There were some interesting things that happen. You may know, if you followed any of that stuff, that I did end up having an out-of-body experience, which was mind-blowing and very ontologically recontextualizing. But no, I did not have any, oh my God, I'm getting a download, I'm communicating with something, at least at Monroe. On psychedelics, sort of.
Okay.
Ayahuasca, I would say, is the closest I've ever gotten to something like that. But
what about,
before I go ahead,
no,
yeah.
Okay, I was just gonna say, like earlier, I kind of mentioned how I feel like I've learned to differentiate, like what you could call your higher self, your intuition, guardian angel, perhaps. Like I personally think all of those things are maybe names for the same thing.
Yeah.
I wonder what that is, because like I said, I now I just seem to I follow that. When I feel that and I can feel it, I don't ask questions anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of times when I look back in my life before I realized the difference between these thoughts and these feelings. When I couldn't tell the difference, I would either ignore it or like go against it and just like write it off as like an invasive thought or something like that. When I started listening to it, and even sometimes the things it's I can feel I'm being like guided or pushed to do something, it's like really hard, or it's like, ending a relationship with someone you care about, like these things that are hard to go through,
Mm-hmm.
but I've done them and it's always ended in a net positive. And for example, like even just with my channel, key decisions that I've made on my channel for like the direction of it and like the like key ideas, I feel like have just been kind of like dropped into my head in a way, and I just kind of follow them. And again, because like I don't know, but I just wonder what that is, because those thoughts, whether you want to call them a download or whatever, to me, like they come with this like add-on that is like, I already know that it's true. It's like, it's not like a conscious thought stream where I'm like, should I do this? Should I do that? It like pops in your head and it's just like, oh no, that is the answer. That's what you need to do. Every single time that's happened, I've followed it. It's never done me wrong. So, I don't know what that is, whether it's another intelligence, whether maybe it's just me. I don't know. But it makes me wonder when we talk about, is that the interacting with another dimension in a way?
I totally think it could be. And I think those subtle pings, those intuitions that just sort of materialize in your mind, I do think there's a very plausible chance that is this intelligence, right? That is this daimon or HGA as the, more modern esoteric tradition, a holy guardian angel as the modern esoteric traditions would call it. I do think that is quite possible, and that we just don't realize we're communicating with it because it doesn't talk to us in a human voice in English or whatever language we speak. It's just, intuitive. It's immediate.
Yeah.
It feels like it is you, but yet, as you're pointing to, if you examine it, you have to ask yourself, where is this coming from?
Yes.
Why is this immediate? Why is this idea popping in my head over and over again? Why do I have this immediate knowing, as you're saying, when I'm with this person or going down this road that I know is not for me?
Yeah.
There's a very admittedly, it is a very mythopoetic book, but it's a very practical book that I would hugely recommend to you, that I've recommended to everybody on this channel a million times, called Soul's Code by James Hillman. He's this psychologist who is sort of in the tradition of Jung. And this book is all about this. It's sort of learning that you do have this calling, you do have this destiny, you do have this higher knowledge that's attached to you. And if you can learn that language, you are going to fulfill, as cheesy as it sounds, your destiny. And it's not necessarily going to go in a storybook way, but it's going to go the way that is the way that you're meant to go. And you can stall out and you can fuck up and you can not develop. He uses the analogy of the acorn becoming the oak tree.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like the acorn already has all that information bound up inside of it. But there's no guarantee the acorn ever becomes the giant oak tree. That's up to you. Are you going to develop into the giant oak tree you could be? Or are you going to stay this little, flaccid little acorn that didn't, ever grow? And I love that, man. I love, like, that right there is the most powerful personal mythology in a nutshell that I've ever encountered, and it feels so true to me. And then you find out that it does directly emanate from Plato and these older esoteric traditions, and it's just beautiful stuff.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
Mm-hmm.
I really do like that, because I feel like when you follow it, when I've followed it just sort of without question, it does seem to take you to just, like, suddenly the things that felt like things going wrong in your life make sense. And it's like, right, that had to happen for me to get here. And I'm in a good place now. But if I didn't go through what in the moment felt like a horrible time in my life, or why is this happening to me, now I can actually look back and it actually makes sense, because that was a requirement to either learn or get to a certain place or meet someone that has put me where I am. So it's literally, and it's, again, sounds cheesy, but just kind of like trusting the process. And if you can differentiate that voice or that feeling, I think that's a huge step towards it.
Yeah. So going back to Colonel Nell talking about all of these things that we're both interested in, to wrap it in a nutshell, I guess it's like the relationship between consciousness and the phenomenon, right? And I mean, one side note piece of disinformation that's kind of occurring to me is that if you're really playing up the consciousness angle, you're really distracting from the nuts and bolts angle, right? Maybe you're trying to get people to look away from more nuts and bolts sources, but I don't think that really checks out, because a lot of these people also openly talk nuts and bolts stuff.
Yeah, it can be both.
Right, totally. Yeah. But anyway, he's not the first. You've covered this guy Aquino on your channel. Aquino, I don't know how you say it.
I think it's Aquino, Michael Aquino.
But yeah, another just intriguing, dark figure who was not only a high-ranking guy in the United States military, founded the Psyop. I believe he either founded the whole Psyop, psychological operations, psychological warfare part of the army, or he greatly developed it. I'm not sure which. But also, it was not just an esotericist, but he actually founded the temple. Is it the Temple of Set? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Which is a theistic, satanic lodge that literally is trying to evoke dark, chaotic forces for personal gain, self-mastery, stuff like that. And this dude was was it a colonel, or was it I should have been more informed.
Lieutenant colonel, I'm pretty sure.
Lieutenant colonel in the army.
Yeah.
Pretty wild.
Yeah, it's I think it's scary. And I mean, not in the sense of like I'm sitting here scared, but in the sense of like what are the implications of that? What today, when we look at society, explains the impact that someone who had this belief system, who was also in charge of psychological operations, how does that explain where we're at today? And, you know, that's only things that we can kind of guess and theorize at, but it just opens up so many questions. So the way that I got introduced to this guy was through a documentary called Out of Shadows. And it blew me away because the clip that they show, and I've showed it on my channel a few times, is Michael Aquino in what looks like his maybe 20s. You know, he looks a lot younger. And he's like black clad gown, like, you know, looks a black magic, occult, ritualistic dress. And he's like ripping a dagger out of its sheath and saying like, this dagger used to belong to Heinrich Himmler, part of the black magic rituals that he would perform under the Veilsburg Castle, which is like known as Heinrich Himmler's horror castle. And then he goes on to say, and I was lucky enough to perform a black magic ritual there myself.
He performed his ceremonies.
I have been to the Veilsburg, which still preserves Heinrich Himmler's ritual chambers to this day, and have conducted a black magical ritual in the so-called Hall of the Dead beneath the Veilsburg. This particular dagger is inscribed to our comrade in the Leibstandarte Theodor Wisch, Brigadeführer, a major general in the Waffen-SS. And on its blade, it bears the inscription, Mein Ehre heißt Treu, or my honor shall be known by my faithfulness.
And I'm like, hang on a minute. Like, this guy's the head of psychological operations in the United States of America. And he's speaking like in these like endearing ways about not just the Nazis, but Heinrich Himmler, who was like one of the most, you know, the books say the nastiest and scariest dudes there was when it comes to this kind of stuff. And so if that's your belief system, one, how are you, like, I understand you can't discriminate against religions or whatever. So there's another clip of him on Oprah, right? And he's there's a clip of him on Oprah. I'm pretty sure it's Oprah. And this is, again, like 80s, 90s. And he's kind of getting questioned. And he says, like, no, the army don't care that I'm a Satanist. They just treat it like any other religion, just like it was Buddhism or whatever, which I find perplexing in itself. But he was friends with Anton LaVey and created like an offshoot of the Church of Satan with the Temple of Set. And it was, kind of like this, I don't know, like a spiritually sort of new age take on Satanism with, more like sort of esoteric principles involved. But from my understanding, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but like Set does sort of convert to Satan. Like they are sort of one and the same, essentially. So I do think we can call him a Satanist. I think that's pretty safe. But what I found interesting was when I would talk about this guy, surprisingly, I got quite a few people kind of pushing back on me and going like, you know, you need to research him more. Like, he's not a Satanist. He's not this, he's not that. And, you know, fair enough. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. And I can't say I did, because from that clip, I was just like, dude, I find it hard. I'm struggling that you're defending this. I'm struggling with that. But I am open if someone can make a compelling argument, because I'm obviously interested to hear both sides.
Yeah. So a couple key questions. So Anton LaVey's Satanism, they are not a theistic religious movement. Like, they don't believe Satan exists. They're atheists that are sort of these like countercultural,
like it's like a hedonistic movement or something, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's all about like self-empowerment and like freeing yourself from all of these cultural constraints and stuff like that. I get that to some degree. I don't necessarily get the preoccupation with the ritual aspect of it. If you're not, you know, I mean, okay, I get it. Yeah, ritual has these powerful psychological effects. I could make a spiritually neutered argument adjacent to the Anton LaVey sort of line. I can sort of get it, right? You like this sort of edgelordy, satanic, dark vibe, and you like okay. But as you were saying, Temple of Set was specifically made because it was not a theistic, satanic religion. he wanted to make one that was like where you actually were evoking, dark, divine, chaotic forces to try to further yourself. Now, what's interesting and what those people may have been pushing back on is that it's not necessarily evil if you look at what his like full-blown goal is, because he's preaching a kind of self-transformation that, while it is wrapped in this more dark, again, edgelordy sort of imagery that I don't personally resonate with, his end goal sounds like what we were talking about earlier, like this idea of becoming who you really are, not just on a psychological self-development kind of strain, but all the way through to a spiritual kind of almost apotheosis, like becoming your higher self in a real spiritual, immortal sense. And while that is completely out of sync with modern, religious traditions, again, if you look back at a lot of these ancient esoteric traditions, going all the way back to Plato's Timaeus, there's a dialogue that's a hard read, but is an unbelievably important one to all esoteric traditions, called the Timaeus. And basically, in a nutshell, this Pythagorean initiate comes and lectures to Socrates and all of his students, and they go through, they attempt to go through the story of the creation of the cosmos and the universe and of human souls and of everything. And all the way back, 2,500 years ago, in this text, it basically says, for every human soul that is made, there is a corresponding star. And this star is like the domicile of the soul. And it can never be destroyed. It will always exist. It's like a shard of this creative consciousness that will be preserved forever and ever. And if you look at this, I did all this research in about 30 minutes last night, by the way. I think either the last book or one of the last books that Aquino writes is called Mind Star. And it's all about this idea of essentially birthing and coming into relationship with this immortal self of yours that already exists, but you need to sort of like wake it up. So I actually think that endeavor, it is ancient and amazing and beautiful, but I also have no idea him as a person. I don't think his method is even probably the way to do it. From what I was reading, it seemed like he was kind of, doing a modern new age grab bag of ideas to the same end goal.
And this,
so maybe there is some complexity there, but this guy, we also should say, was accused of child abuse and all kinds of other shit, and I'm not co-signing him at all.
Yeah.
I really don't know a lot about him, so I'm just going to leave it kind of at that.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up as well. Is that there is a whole bunch of child abuse accusations against him, which all, of course, got dropped, and there was no conviction or anything like that. Which kind of, takes us back to where we were at the start of the show, talking about there seems to be this connection to people with this belief in Satanism and ritualistic abuse, specifically of children. Again, this guy wasn't convicted, but the accusations were there. And, I think generally, for the most part, a lot of the time where there's smoke, there's probably fire. But you are right in that the Temple of Set and Michael Aquino's belief systems echo a lot of these things that trace, right back to these like Egyptian mystery schools of like Hermeticism, which Aleister Crowley kind of took little parts of and created his thalamic sort of belief system, which he was then hanging out with L. Ron Hubbard, who then ended up, he wrote Dianetics and then ended up obviously creating Scientology, which when you look into it, sounds a lot like these things in that you have to kind of cleanse the negative sort of energies out of your body first, and then you can begin to align yourself with your true will. I think true will was the term Crowley used to use, actually, true will. And
again, it sounds pretty similar to what we were talking about before, right? Like
that's what I'm saying.
Individuation, all these things. Yeah.
That's right. Like this Scientology, Thelema, Hermeticism, Temple of Set. They're just like reskins of
Yes.
this ancient belief system, but perhaps with a little bit of whatever that person's own maybe individual ideas and beliefs kind of molded into it. But at the core of all of it, there seems to be about kind of tapping into your like who you truly are and learning to sort of find what your path is and your destiny, and just kind of becoming the architect of your own reality and not allowing the noise to kind of pull your emotions either way, and just letting that sort of path take you.
Well said, dude. And you use the word architect, which is perfect, because one of my sort of pet projects that I will never succeed in is trying to make the demiurge good again. Because so demiurge actually is the Greek word for craftsman, or sometimes you get architect. And, you know, in the modern like internet lore sort of circles, people only know the demiurge as this Gnostic, evil, false god. But the first use of the word is in Plato's Timaeus, hundreds and hundreds of years before any of these negative connotations come about. And it literally just means the consciousness that created reality, right? And I think that's what it is, man. And I think that also incidentally is the esoteric meaning of humans being made in God's image. If God's image is literally just consciousness that has the ability to create, and human beings have this ability to create, that's what we're meant to do. And that's why it feels good to create what only you can uniquely create, right? It's like there's something that deeply in you knows this is what I'm supposed to be doing as a human being. There's something so deeply satisfying about me transmuting all of this nebulous shit inside of myself. I can never put into words. I can never put into a song. I can never put into something. But guess what? It feels a lot better when I try than when I keep it all inside and I just work on fucking spreadsheets all day. Like, that is something that I think is so core to the spiritual truth of what it is to be a human being. And you're totally right. And I think that that's why all of these guys just come and reskin that truth, because there's no way around it. It's like we need to try to, at least in the Western sense, the only alternative I think is the total self-nullification path, which traditionally is more associated with Eastern mystery stuff, right? Or Eastern ascetic, esoteric traditions, where it's self-nullifying, self-annihilating, rejection of ego, rejection of trying to get out of the cycle of reincarnation so you can just merge back with the all or the nothing or whatever they call it. But I am way more pulled to this Western view of self-becoming, of the great work, as the alchemists and esotericists call it, of trying to figure out what you are, what you're meant to become, and really living that path. And as dark and weird and in air quotes left-hand path as that has become, I think we all innately understand that that's sort of the calling, and we can either choose to follow it or not, or either choose to follow it or go just kind of disappear into the easy paths that are all laid out for us by society, that have caused the biggest mental health crisis, that there's ever been, that just seems to keep getting worse and worse and worse.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that it's going to be easy if you go this path, but I do I'm not even going to finish the sentence because it's just, there's no way it's not going to come out cheesy. And I think people get it. But yeah, I don't even know how to circle that back into this
well, I mean, we sort of were talking earlier about like Matthew Brown as well. And
thank you.
Yeah, I got to interview the guy, the creator who created he didn't create the Sigillum Dei Meth, but it was his drawing of it in a video of his that Matthew Brown referenced. And that was really cool, man. Like he again, when it comes to like reading people, came across as like a really genuine guy. And it was in my interview with him, I didn't really push him too much on like the Matthew Brown related stuff, because he'd already done an interview with Pavel on Psychoactivo, and where he kind of talked to him about that. So I was more interested in just sort of talking about esoteric, knowledge and how he got started and what he's learned. And that was that was really cool because, you know, he was honest with me and said that he had dabbled with like trying to contact demons and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which was wild. And, you know, even like a few people were giving him a bit of heat for that in the comments. But, you know, I think this guy has been doing this stuff for like over 10 years. And, you know, he kind of seems like he's maybe about my age. So I don't know. I think like, not that I'm recommending people contact demons at all, but what I'm saying is like, you know, if you're a young man and you've been initiated into this stuff and you realize there's kind of like good and evil, I think it's only human in a way to, you know, we learn by trying and discovering for ourselves. You know, like I'm sure you've been told growing up many things like, hey, don't do this. That's not good. Like you shouldn't do that. But you really don't learn that lesson until you go and do it yourself and you go like, oh shit, that kind of hurt. I definitely won't do that again. I should have listened. And I feel like, you know, that might have been the same with him, but that was a wild one to hear, you know, some of the things he's saying about talking to angels and maybe what Matthew Brown is alluding to.
Yeah, let's back up and just introduce Matthew Brown. I've talked about him on the channel for sure. I've talked about the tweets. I've talked about the interviews, but
for Matthew Brown, yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I think it's a bit of a crime that interview never got followed up on with a. I think we need a podcast because I think that was an interview, and it's great that we got it. And you know, he did come across as pretty genuine, and he said such groundbreaking kind of things that the fact that it hasn't been followed up is a bit. I mean, I don't want to say like irresponsible, but it kind of is in a way. Like, you know, you kind of come out and say like, you know, everything is a lie. We live in a matrix. God is real. Aborimon, Sigillum Deumeth, and then never surface again. It's kind of like, are you trying to add fuel to this fire? Because, you know, a lot like I suddenly you've got podcasters interviewing esoteric people who have been involved in occult knowledge for a long time because we're trying to put the pieces together ourselves because this guy just literally dropped a knowledge bomb, a cryptic knowledge bomb, and never kind of came back. So it's, you know, it's like what not that I think his intentions were bad, but what did you expect the result would be from this interview and this cryptic tweet and then to never say anything again? Like it almost feels like a bit of fuel on the fire rather than answers.
Right. Yeah. And just to give the real boilerplate. So Matthew Brown, in case anyone's foggy, he's a whistleblower that came forward. He was interviewed by Knapp and Corbell. They did this 3-part series that's very, it borders on things that he had direct knowledge of as a high-ish ranking contractor who was working at the Pentagon, who had ability to access classified servers. The story is he stumbles across a whole bunch of UAP-related stuff. He leaks a bunch of it out under this document called Immaculate Constellation. I'm still sort of unclear on if that was the name of a program he discovered or if he just sort of like invented that or pulled it out of something.
I think it was the name. From my recollection, it was the name of it, and that's why he authored the paper that got given to Congress at the last hearing.
Yep. So then he leaks this or creates this document that sort of summarizes a bunch of the stuff. It's directly called out during the congressional UAP hearing. Then later, the face gets matched to the leak, and it's this Matthew Brown guy. And he, as I said, does these interviews with Knapp and Corbell. But he says all of this stuff, as Josh is alluding to, where it doesn't really seem to be things he saw on a classified server, but it's these big, broad statements about reality, being like, you know, using the word matrix, saying God, like ending the whole series of interviews with God is real, doesn't expand on that, but then later lets these cryptic tweets out that are just like, to get to the bottom of, you need a combination of somebody who is like an initiate in Western esoteric lodge magic, like the lifting the lamp guy who you talked to. And then we need like a UAP Gerb in there who's like, you know, nerd level, knows everything about all these contractors, what a Mentum Corporation is, what these hangars are that are being talked about. Because for people who haven't read this tweet, and we're probably not going to read it again on the channel, but we've read it before. But if you go over to Matthew Brown's Twitter, you'll see this. It's images of sigils from occult traditions. It's words for certain angels and demons. It's literally calling out different aerospace contractors, with the implication being there's something to do with craft and God knows what else there.
He also
it's just,
he alludes to the idea that the American government has some kind of like future telling AI as well,
Yeah.
which is kind of like, again, these are like very, these kind of statements have like big implications if they're true. So again, I don't want to throw shade on Matthew Brown, because I would love to hear from him again, so I can actually, like, in a podcast where it's not edited like an interview, like I just want to see him sit down for like 3 hours with like Jesse Michaels or something, and just get, with you, with whoever, like just someone to just unedited, let me get a read on this guy. Let me see the raw footage of like, who is this guy, and what, is this whole like linking of a Borimon, which is what he signed off this tweet with, which, he's kind of left this breadcrumb trail, because to find a Borimon, it came from the screenshot of the Sigillum Deum that was from Frada Eleftheria's video, or Lifting the Lamp, which that video was about decoding the word Aborimon from this sigil. And what it basically is like the 8th, because, I think I could be getting the terminology wrong here, but traditionally there's 7 archangels. I believe like Aborimon was like the hidden 8th one, or he is this like hidden angel that is revealed at the end times, at the essentially when at the end of the world, when it's, and I think end of the world, obviously there's a lot of talk about like 2027 and all this kind of shit like that. If something like that is to happen and it is end times, I don't think it's like Armageddon, the world is actually going to end. I think these are the beginnings of new eras, new cycles. It could be the end of the world as we know it, and there is going to be a big shift in the social structures, society, consciousness, even like there could be a force that is kind of creating this awakening in people, starting to understand and recognize consciousness, recognize their intuition as for what it is. And that could be like, to put it in a human context that we can understand, that like there is some kind of shift or switch that has been made from a higher dimension that affects us, that is, for lack of a better word, like turning up or turning on the consciousness that we feel and experience, and people are becoming more aware of it. And that in itself is going to create the shift. These are obviously just my own theories and ideas, but it kind of, it could be.
No, that's where my mind goes as well. And I know that there's like, even on my channel, there's going to be people who, as soon as they hear the word astrology, they have a knee jerk like, ugh, or something.
Yeah.
But if you're into esotericism, I don't care from what part of the world, whether it's Eastern or Western, the idea that what's going on in broader nature, what we would call space, it's all the language. It's all the part of the hidden language of reality, and it does somehow emanate to our plane on a level that might seem subtle to us, but again, according to it, whether it's Jyotish, like the Indian astrology, or it's Western esoteric, Western zodiac astrology, they all agree that this is hugely important for understanding what the sort of collective energy of reality is. And according to both of those traditions, we're moving into a new age. And this is something that only happens like once every couple thousand years.
Yeah.
So it would make sense that almost feels apocalyptic. And in the literal sense of the word, revealing, it is apocalyptic in that there's a completely new archetypal sort of milieu that is going to establish itself as we move into this Aquarian age, or whatever tradition. Some people say there's a yuga shift too, which is an even a longer Indian concept, that we're moving from one yuga into the Kali yuga. I don't remember what the next yuga is supposed to be, but anyway, if there's any truth to any of that, it's going to feel apocalyptic in the sense that most people think of it. Like, it's going to feel like the world is ending, And it's probably going to be turbulent, because what
Yes.
that's going to mean is that all the old power structures are not going to be able to hang on in the same ways they used to. And that's part of the course archetypal symbolism of Aquarius, is this much more free-flowing, decentralized energy, borders around things, from everything from identity to self to probably countries. All established forms of power are going to slowly start evaporating. And what I'm hopeful about is that that means a greater sense of not only freedom for self, but understanding of self in an ecosystem that we didn't even all agree existed before this shift occurred, this shift in consciousness occurred. So is that all going to happen in like 2026 or 2027? I want to believe it. I want to believe like the Chris Bledsoes of the world are right.
Yeah.
That they, that all of the truth is going to come, consciousness is going to be raised. But I've also been around this block, man. I was around in 2012. I've seen many doomsday prophecies come and go, knock on wood. So it's hard to be like, yeah, there's going to be this singular moment.
Do you ever think, though, that like with 2012 and 2000 was a big one too?
Yeah.
Do you think that, again, perhaps the end of the world didn't happen, but did they perhaps mark some kind of like big shift in society that perhaps when we're so busy waiting for a giant asteroid to wipe us all out, we actually don't, and because obviously a year is a long time, right? When we say a big shift happened in, say, the year 2000, well, if that shift kind of happened over a year or even the subsequent years, we're probably not going to notice it. But perhaps, if you sort of were able to now look back, and if we were to really analyze it and look at maybe some of the way things were tracking in society, whether it be something to do with war, stock markets or whatever, any like things, big shifts, you might actually look back and notice that like actually the world kind of did change around this time, and it kind of put us on this different trajectory. And so I think if the Chris Bledsoe thing, I wouldn't be surprised if Easter 2026 comes and then, May, June, July comes and it kind of all feels like nothing's really changed. That wouldn't surprise me, because I feel like these shifts, like you said, they happen every kind of couple of thousands of years. They certainly wouldn't happen overnight. They would probably take years, maybe even like a full century to like fully shift out of the old and into the new.
And yeah, man, totally. You can do that retrospectively and look at, wow, the internet, AI, even just from 2000 to now, a phone was like a fun little brick toy that you had that was this is a cool little invention. Now, for most people, a lot of their reality is completely contingent on their devices, facing their devices, living in that digital dimension. And that in and of itself is such a massive difference in how we experience reality that is a kind of Armageddon in a way, because it is a total shift in how millions upon millions of people actively live their lives.
Yes.
And yeah, you can totally do that.
Dude,
but
and
I also,
you actually just clicked me back to where I was, how you're saying like this shift that we're going to go through, like it's not, I don't think this is anything like, I think this is just part of the way things go, right? It's going to be a shift. It's going to be gradual. It's not going to be an end of the world thing. It's something that is going to happen over time. And every shift, even if it's like, if we scale it down to like when you start a new job, you now have to go find a new way to work. You got to find a new place to park. You got to get used to the new people at your job. Every shift in life is not easy. It feels like there's friction. It feels a bit chaotic, a bit like tense. I think that's why the times feel like this. They feel chaotic and they feel tense. And if people think it's the end of the world, but every shift, friction is a part of shift. And I think, hopefully it's sooner rather than later. But when this shift is on its when the dust begins to settle, I think we'll be able to look back at it and be like, that was the time where we kind of broke out of the old way of living and we kind of moved into this sort of new age where things are very different. But that transition is going to maybe feel, like you said, the end of the world or a lot of friction.
Mhm. Yeah. And I'm of two minds about it, where the more intellectual part of me is like, of course it's going to be archetypal. It's going to be subtle. It's going to be something that shifts the zeitgeist, because that's what this other realm really is. It's this realm of psyche, and that's how it comes out into the world. First, it starts with that, and then it comes out through human action. But God damn it, I want mass orb sightings. I want the divine feminine to reveal herself to reality. I want the aliens to land. Like, I want some kind of bolt from the blue, orthogonal moment of revealing that the whole world is like, holy fucking shit, this is real. Like, I want it to be that. I want it to be that. And even now, in hindsight, let's say that happens in a year or 5 or whatever. In hindsight, I'll probably look back and be like, I was such an idiot for saying I wanted that. I had no idea that it would mean, stock markets tanking and whole ways of life just, having to dry up, because who knows what that would really mean and what that would really entail and how that would shift the power structure of reality.
Well, I think that's probably got a lot to do with why disclosure does seem so slow and a snail's pace and so complicated, because I do think that probably is the reality for a lot of people. Like, people like you and I, or people who are kind of like, read into this general topic and have kind of an understanding, are probably going to be able to cope with these things better. But the reality is that we are like they say like 60% of people believe in aliens, but I think, I don't think 60% of people are like understanding the idea of like interdimensional concepts and whatever. Like, I feel like for the most part, people would actually go kind of crazy if aliens just popped up. I actually think a lot of people would, like, it would fry their brain, because it would just completely nuke and destroy their entire worldview that they've sat with for 50, 60 or more years. Like, if someone who's like 70 or 80 who doesn't believe in aliens came face to face with one, it could kill them, I think, from just like a heart attack, literally. So yeah, I think I think the idea of like a big, mass landing around the world is like a cool thought. And I feel like personally it would be wild, but I feel like I could handle it, but I don't think the world would handle it well.
It would be, I really believe it would just be surreal. I think it would be this surreal thing where I've done this thought experiment before, and I'm sure you have too, where there's going to be this negotiation of, you're going to almost see it in real time. Like, if you could collectively read all the text of the internet at once, it would be this negotiation between, this is a false flag, Project Bluebeam, I don't believe this shit, and then people in the middle being like, what's going on? Like, what? I don't understand. Like, what is this? And then there's going to be the people who fully believe it. And that's how we will collectively psychically metabolize something like that until we just get used to it. But I do think on the fringes, at a minimum, you'd have people in complete ontological shock, complete denial, complete inability to even begin to wrap their mind around what's happening.
Oh, dude, you would 100% have people shooting at them.
For sure.
Yeah, people would 100% shoot at them just out of like pure fear. And again, that in a way comes back to, the emotional sort of vibration scale. Like, what do you live your life from? If you live your life from fear, you're going to be the guy ripping out a gun and trying to shoot at these things. Or if you live your life from a place of like empathy and love, you're probably going to still maybe be pretty like nervous and a bit shocked as to what you're seeing, because there's a big difference between seeing and believing. You can believe in Jesus all day long, but if he comes and descends from the clouds and walks into your living room glowing, you're probably going to have a meltdown, because now it's real. So if you can manage to overcome that fear and still try to come from a good place, it's going to completely change the way that whole situation plays out, right? It's going to change the whole way that situation plays out, which I think reinforces the importance of people understanding consciousness and frequency and where they live their life from. Because if everyone is in this low state and the aliens come, everyone's going to freak the hell out. But if we're a bit higher than that and a bit more enlightened, it's going to probably be handled completely differently on a global scale as well.
Yeah. So I said one of the ideas I had is, we could start this conversation with just fun or compelling or scary lore, but I want to move into like what you really suspect is going on and which stories kind of stick with you, not just as, like I said, fun or evoking emotion, but as I really suspect that something like this is probably the truth. Like, where do you find yourself resonating?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things that resonate with me, and to just try and give you like an overview of what I lean towards, again, because I would never say anything with full conviction because I stay open. But what I lean towards is that there is something that has been here on Earth just as long as us, potentially longer, that has been either guiding, steering, or socially engineering us for a long time. And I think potentially it's something to do with whatever these orbs are that people see, that they somehow play a role in that, and that they seem to perhaps come from the ocean, or there's some kind of connection to the ocean involved in that, and that they're responsible for a lot of like divine encounters that you read about in religious texts. Like these kind of things are the same things that people are reporting today as like a UAP experience. And I also think that a non-human intelligence, like a humanoid, may also be here. And I do think that there has been that. I do think there was an agreement between the American military and a form of non-human intelligence. Now, it's a pretty wild thing to say, but I'm okay with saying that's what I lean into, because I think it makes sense based on just when you look at things, when you look at some of the decisions that have been made from a military industrial complex point of view, some of the whistleblower testimony that's come out, couple it with the fact that there seems to be a lot of strangeness happening under the ground in the southwestern part of America.
Yeah.
And you've got people talking about underground bases around Guadalupe Island. And then you've got like just the coast of like Puerto Rico and the Bermuda Triangle. Like there is a whole multitude of strangeness concentrated kind of around America. And, the SR-71, the Skunk Works started building that thing in the 50s. That thing still, if you pulled that out today, you'd be like, holy damn, is this like a interplanet rocket ship? Like this thing almost doesn't even look like a plane. Like this is crazy. Mm-hmm. That was built in the 50s, or it started being built in the 50s, first flown in the 60s. So just like applying logic to that, there has clearly been some kind of like technological leap that has been suppressed. That, yeah, I mean, this is when you start getting into like, maybe, is there a deep state controlling the military industrial complex? Right. What does that mean? Is there a transnational organization that's, I almost kind of think that each country is almost like a regional manager reporting to the big dog. And we don't know who the big dog is. They're probably a big group, but that seems to make the most sense to me, that there is something working alongside the Western military. Let's just group everyone in here. The Western part of the world that perhaps has their own agenda and is acting it out through, I don't know. There seems to be a lot of war that just doesn't ever end.
Right. I mean, even things that just completely shred the mind, like what can going on in Palestine be going on? Like how can that ever be justified in the mind of any human being with a shred of compassion? Like all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, dude, it's I mean, and and then it brings us back to this religious perspective, right? Because Chris Bledsoe has said it, and I watched a great video the other day where they were talking about this, and it seems like the people who are waging this war are trying to literally like trigger the end times. They're trying to trigger the return of the Messiah. Yeah. Like this is like a holy war. This is based on trying to follow prophecy and fulfill the prophecy and the scripture. So
Yeah, and that's not a conspiracy, by the way. Like, you can find some of these people who are like of that alignment openly talking about that in positions of power.
Yeah, exactly. So again, this is why disclosure is so complicated, because I just think there's so many things going on that the public aren't told about. And I actually think Matthew Brown mentioned that in his interview too, that he said like there are so many things in this world that people just don't know about, that you essentially live in like an illusion. Like you live in a carefully controlled reality of what you can know and what you can't know. And there is literally almost entire worlds that exist beyond what you're allowed to know, that if you knew it all, it would probably feel like you live in like another realm. You live in another dimension, because that kind of knowledge just puts you in a completely different state of mind.
Again, every ancient tradition says this. You know, there's like, especially in the Platonic and Hermetic tradition, in the Gnostic tradition, there's like these Eastern maps of all the different spheres of reality as well. The sort of yogic version of it is slipping my mind what it's called, but yeah, they all seem to agree that reality is actually this sort of nested hierarchy of consciousnesses and dimensions, right? And again, we look at that now and we're like, dummies, they thought that's how outer space was configured. Idiots. That's not what they thought. That's what they discovered through I think consciousness technologies that have either been lost or potentially purposefully suppressed to control people. And I think that that's along the lines of what Matthew Brown could be talking about, is that and that's one of the, logical reasons why would you ever be grouping something like Western esoteric ritual magic and talking about you know military industrial complex contractors? Like, what could the link possibly be there? And to me, it seems like it's consciousness and understandings about consciousness that may eventually lead to a kind of technology where those two things merge. And again, that's what all this psionic stuff seems to be pointing to as well. And that it just, again, it's like there's breadcrumbs and it's so tantalizing, but there's like never any hard answers there. But yeah, man, I resonate with a lot of what you said. I mean, I don't know how I feel about like necessarily a direct treaty, or I mean, maybe I don't discount the possibility at all. But there's always part of me that always like leans more Terrence McKenna, who I love that he's in your intro, by the way. Where, like, he's got this whole riff about like nobody knows what the fuck is going on, and it's like it's like there's clearly he believed in other worlds, he believed in other intelligences, and that consciousness was the portal to those other intelligences. But when the human mind arrives there, it is so chaotic, it is so beyond language, it is so beyond our control, that even though we know when we get there that it's more real, that this is the higher world, that this is where we come from, this is probably where we go when we die, we still come back into our little meat suit, and all we have are these pathetic little mouth noises, our pathetic little technologies, and to even try to constrain whatever that reality is into our reality with language is laughably stupid. And it's like, so I dance between these two things, because I do think there could be a breakaway civilization, man. I do think there could be like, anti-gravitic technologies, but I don't know,
Yeah.
All I know is what I've experienced. And I know that McKenna's right about that part, that when you do take a heroic dose or get into some far out states of consciousness and you come back, you're just like, whoa, I don't know anything.
Yeah, I am nothing. Yeah, absolutely. And another theory I've sort of had with like the whole idea of breakaway civilization, where you kind of reminded me where you've spoken about, these sort of ancient civilizations seem to understand about like sort of transcending reality and like through consciousness and things like that, is, there are these lost civilizations on Earth that seem to be able to build these amazing structures that still stand today, that seem to have been done with a technology that at least us normies don't know about. And maybe, people inside the skunk works or whatever do, but we don't. And then, we've discovered like Derinkuyu in Turkey, and there's these like underground tunnel systems, and we've and the new scans that we're seeing about underneath the pyramids, we're finding these things that kind of suggest that a civilization that probably existed around these times went underground, potentially to survive a cataclysm, right? And these chambers in Derinkuyu, like they're perfectly like resonantly tuned to like a specific frequency. There's all of these weird anomalies to them that would be extremely hard for someone today to replicate, right? What I find interesting is that nobody seems to be asking the question of like, okay, so this civilization had obviously incredible technology. They were capable of building such profound things. We seem to find evidence that they could have used to survive a cataclysm. Well, what if they did survive? Where are they? Because it seems like there's something suggesting that they could have. And I mean, at the very least, if they were capable of building these things, perhaps they were also capable of building something to escape a cataclysm. Or if they did go underground, perhaps this technology also enables them to kind of live harmoniously and happily under there. In fact, maybe after the cataclysm, they realize, fuck, it's not safe up there. Let's just set up camp down here. We'll stay down here. And, who knows? You said earlier that we are like born and bred to create. And that is what we do. Like, we're innovators. We not only create, but we always want to reiterate and make a better one and improve. If like we could just be like a literal worker bee for an advanced civilization that is below us, and maybe we're just making weapons for them, or we're just doing something. Who knows, man? It's one of many theories that I find interesting, and these are the ones I kind of lean towards. But again, I only keep 1 foot in all of this. I never go 2 feet in.
Yeah. Don't go 2 feet into Agartha. You'll disappear in Hollow Earth. But yeah, man, like that's the ultimate psyop, by the way, is getting everybody to look at the sky. They all come from the ground.
I think so too.
I don't believe that, but
no,
but
I think, dude, if there is something interacting with us that's here, it's from here. I don't think it's come from like Zeta Reticuli or something like that. I do think that if it's here, it's among us. Maybe not underground, but it's among us somehow. It's not coming here on spaceships. But again, who knows? Could be wrong.
I mean, it makes sense, dude. The sort of either ultra-terrestrial or crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, this idea that there is another that's here. And I personally lean toward, and again, not committed to any one, but I personally lean toward that it's probably not physical, because it just makes sense that, and this also is where most of the esoteric stuff points as well, is that the physical world is really the lowest possible emanation of reality. If you look at any of these, whether it's like the Kabbalah tree of life with the 10 Sephirot, or it's the, these like Platonic, these Neoplatonic hierarchies of worlds, or Gnostic versions of the same thing, it's always like there are essentially these nodes or these planes of reality that lead all the way back to fundamental oneness, like fundamental unspeakable mystery, union of consciousness, source of consciousness. And then that like emanates or drips down into our realm where it condenses into physical forms. But even like the very next realm up is not a material realm. It's some kind of, choose your word, consciousness based, spiritual, whatever realm. And it just keeps getting more and more archetypally mind fucking the higher you go up and you go up and you go up, until you get to these upper nodes that are essentially like, what they would have called in the ancient Greeks would have called hypercosmic gods, that are sort of like the very, very first distillations of consciousness that came off of the indescribable oneness. So, stuff like that. So I lean toward that sort of framing, that it's probably whatever it is that's evoking us, that's like putting the carrot stick in front of us, for better or for worse, is probably not something that's walking around in a body. And I think that if it is, it's probably sort of like what you're hearing in the UFO lore, where it's almost drone-like, where it will
Yeah.
send physical things into our realm, but they almost don't even seem to care if they die, because that's not what they are. They already
Yeah.
know that they're connected to this cloud of higher consciousness or something like that, and they'll send something into physical reality if they need to, but that's not really what they are. But
I
Yeah.
do agree with that line of thinking, and I think it makes a lot of sense when we, start to learn about projecting consciousness and like ESP. The idea that things like telepathy are possible makes sense when you consider it's because we all actually come from this single source, right? But what I also think is that I'm open to the idea of that being true, and that whole idea of a higher dimension kind of working through us as maybe like a muse or inspiration, or dangling the carrot like you said, that could be like a uniquely human thing as well. Like that could just be for a human thing that we are connected to, and that's why humanity is sort of like this divine creation. But then I think it could potentially also be true that there are other humanoid looking intelligences that are either here or have maybe come here from somewhere else. Because one thing that really does interest me is, first of all, that there is serpent-like beings spoken about in almost every creation story. Whether
true.
it's in Australia, you've got the rainbow serpent. Of it, the Bible talks about obviously the snake in the Garden of Eden. You've got the Nagas in Hinduism, which are actually framed as positive entities. You've got the Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, and there are more. So there are these serpents.
Egyptian. It's all over Egyptian stuff and Greek stuff as well.
Exactly, and you see depicted in hieroglyphics in Egypt these gods or deities with the head of a jackal or the head of a crocodile or a bird, and it's just like, what does that mean? Is this like, are they depicting an archetype of a person? Are they actually depicting what they saw? Right. It's fascinating, man, and I do think that I really do agree with what you said about humans and sort of something acting through us and determining our path. Like, I think our path is set and we're just playing it out. That's what I believe. But I also think there could be something else that exists to the side that isn't sharing this human experience, but is able to interact with us.
Yeah, man, I'm totally open to all possibilities. And what I really hold on to with hope is that, and I do think this is true, is that humans have at least a modicum of free will. We're not just completely, it's just funny, man, because it's funny how whether you go to the most materialist, reductive narrative, they always want to try to convince you that you have no free will, that you're completely, the victim of physics and your biology, and your brain just automatically makes a decision, and then you just think you made the decision of your own free will, but you didn't make any decisions. So you have that like sort of reductive materialistic argument, and then you have on the like far woo side, you have the everything's manipulated, we're controlled by lizard people or the Gnostic demiurge or whatever, and you have zero control. But I really push both of those ways of thinking aside and think those are both very damaging, dead end ways of thinking. And I think it does not hold up to even a tiny amount of scrutiny, because, is my life perfect? Absolutely not. Is your life perfect? I don't even know you personally that well, but I know your life isn't perfect because I know you're a human being. But I also know that you have made conscious choices, even just based on this conversation, that have made your life better and have probably collectively made the lives of your audience better or more fun or more filled with wonder or whatever. And that shit matters. And if we go down these weird paths of like, I have no power, I'm completely, impotent of any kind of agency, that's a dead end, bro. Like, to anybody listening, like take yourself out of that way of thinking, because it's just only going to lead into these like dead ends of like, incel garbage mind that you don't want to find yourself in. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
And rant.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like it. I agree. I think we definitely have free will 100%, and you can become the architect of your reality if you know do the work and read the books, or however you want to sort of get the knowledge. It's there, it's free, it's open source. You just got to kind of look for it. They're not going to teach it to you in school. When I say I think we're on a path that we're kind of like headed down no matter what, I think that kind of sounds negative, but I don't mean it that way at all. Like I think humanity will sort itself out, because I do believe that like good trumps evil no matter what at the end of the day. And I'm not like a religious person. I never have been. My belief in sort of like a God and a creative force has actually come just through looking into UFOs, right?
Cool.
Not that I was like an atheist, but I just wasn't really interested. But the deeper I got, I was kind of like, damn, kind of seems like this shit's real. And so what I think is at the end of the day, through this perhaps like interdimensional thing that is dangling the carrot and acting through us, when like through that action, whatever is meant to happen will happen. But we do have free will in that process. But I feel like we will always end up where we're meant to.
I'm with you, bro. And I didn't mean to insinuate, you know, when what I was saying as like as an argument to what you were saying about you know, things seeming deterministic, because I do think there's a middle path there, and that's actually where I gravitate. And even if we boil it down to like, let's boil it down to the tiniest possible modicum of free will a person can have, where it's binary. Just say it's one decision. There's one decision that matters, let's say, and it's whether you individuate and evolve into what you could be or not. That is extremely important. You know, it's extremely important whether, and I don't think it's that simple, because I don't think it's either, you know, the acorn becomes the oak tree or it doesn't. I think there's a whole gradient range of possibilities that we could achieve or not within our lifetimes, but there's still the template, right? There's still what we could become or not. And I think that the whole world is probably in that kind of a situation where it could evolve into this thing. And I don't even know what to call it, but it does seem like there is a sort of beehive kind of situation going on here, that we're giving birth to something, that something is, you know, going to be born out of whatever we're all doing here. And maybe it's up to us whether we summon God or the devil or whatever. Maybe
a Borimon.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think like binary belief systems is also like what we need to leave behind in this shift, and start to realize that like the nature of reality is not black, in fact, like kind of like nothing is black and white, really. Like it's always some shade of gray. It could be very almost black, in my opinion, but it's probably got a bit of white in it, because nothing is really just so matter of fact. Like life is just so complex, especially when we start talking about like other dimensions influencing or acting through us. You know, you start to realize that like nothing is as simple as yes or no, or black or white, or 1 or 0. It's and you know, quantum, like what we're hearing about in like quantum mechanics and in qubits is like both can be right at the same time. You can exist in two different states at the same time, or the answer can be kind of somewhere in the middle of 1 and 0. So it's interesting to hear that like in a way we're kind of, from like a physics and quantum mechanics perspective, we're starting to learn that life is not just 1 or 0.
Yeah, bro. And you know, what the even more bleeding edge thing is, people starting to talk about, okay, there's this fraught effort that you're going to run into right away if you start diving into physics, which is relativity right? Is quantum physics right? Are they both right? Is there a missing thing like string theory that's going to link them all together? And then you have other people coming out and be like, yeah, you're seeing where the end of these theories, these maps, run out. And that's because they don't actually describe reality. They describe a really big portion of reality well. And then you get into these portions of reality, like underneath the Planck length, for instance, where seemingly those analogies don't apply anymore. So now you got to ask, well, if there's a more fundamental reality than relativity or quantum theory, what is that? And
Yeah.
there's already people asking that question. And my favorite answer is consciousness. Is that that's the one thing you're never going to get underneath, is like there's a fundamental consciousness that gives rise to everything. And, you know, I've interviewed a lot of these people over the years, Dr. Donald Hoffman, Bernardo Kastrup, Federico Fagin, who are these like super geniuses who are going down that kind of a path. And I think if we collect it, and this idea to me, and maybe it's just the circles I run in, but this idea to me does seem to be seeping into the zeitgeist more and more. And I think that that is going to fundamentally change the questions we're asking about reality. And if we're changing the questions we're asking about reality, what we do in reality will also change. And the kind of technologies that eventually spawn off of that change of mind will also change. And that's going to be crazy, man. Like if there ever is in our lifetime a truly consciousness based, like, or even let's just say we're going whatever the X thing is after quantum computing. We're already hearing things coming out of quantum computing, like simulating worlds, you know, basically like solving every possible disease, breaking every cryptological cipher that mankind has ever came up with, just like that.
Yeah.
Now let's say there's a thing after that. What does that even mean? You know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and I think we'll get there. Maybe we won't even know what the fuck we're doing anymore. Maybe AI will take us there, and it will be like, here's magic, guys. And we'll be like, I don't know how this works, but it works. So clearly we're going to use it. You know, maybe that's where it's headed. I don't know, man.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it. But I feel like in the day and age that we live now and the systems and structures that are in place, it does feel like before that kind of candy gets handed out to everyone, we need to like rebuild the house first, because that kind of like people with that kind of knowledge on a broad scale is not going to like compart, like, you know, if people know that they can essentially perform magic through understanding quantum mechanics, are they going to want to go to work? Like, do they even need to go to work anymore?
Probably
Can they
not.
just create what they need through a new understanding of physics? It completely shakes up the paradigm. And I think that's maybe why we feel like we're in this period now, because it is time to kind of shed the old skin and give birth to the new one. But that's a pretty, you know, it's a pretty tough time to be in the thick of. But I feel like on the grand scheme of things, it may even just be like a little blip on the timeline. I hope so anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe it will even just destroy the timeline. You know, I think in, you know, this is the most cliche stoner bro talk of all time, but I really do think that that's one of our big constraints, is seeing reality through the prism of time. Like, this happened, then this happened, then this happened.
Yeah.
And the universe is this old, and I'm this old. And clearly, all of those things are operationally true. But I think that there are levels of knowing that we're going to somehow uncover that are going to show that that is illusory, or at least that is a very tiny fraction of the truth. And whatever the higher truth is like absolutely not bound by time, absolutely not bound by, like, I think there's going to come a time, to make a weird prognostication, we're talking about the age of the universe is going to just be a flawed idea. And maybe that's a very weird thing to say, but
yeah, it's interesting. Like, you always, again, cliche, but you hear people talk about how time is a construct, a social construct, which it obviously is, because it really only is necessary. I can't see a reason why an understanding of time would be necessary other than to have like an organized, structured type of society that we live in today, where people have deadlines and people have things where they need to do and need to be. Like, if we scaled it right back to, you know, when people just like worshipped the sun, and, you know, you went out, hunted your food and stuff like that, like, you don't really need to know what time it is, because you just operate on a more sort of primal clock, your circadian rhythm. It gets you up and puts you to bed at night, and you're just kind of more in touch with nature. Like, in a sense, I mean, like, I guess time maybe still exists, but it doesn't need to be like measured and like calculated, because it's just not necessary. But when it is, that almost in itself changes the way we kind of like operate in reality.
It does, man. Time's a prison, man. And speaking of time's a prison, maybe the fact that we're like getting into the the most cliche topic possible this late into the conversation means we should close it out. We don't have to. If there's something else on your mind, we can riff on that too.
No, I think we covered sort of what we set out to do. It's 1 a.m. here, but
yeah, bro.
If anything pops up, we can keep rolling. But if you're happy with that, I am too.
No, dude, it was really fun. This is exactly what I wanted out of this conversation. Obviously, we're gonna win multiple Nobel Prizes.
I think so.
So I'm excited. I think we're gonna win the first Nobel Prize for podcasting.
I would, if I was dishing out the award, I would definitely pick this one.
Like I was saying,
Thank you,
I hope we can hang one of these days. Maybe a contact in the desert next year or something.
Yeah, for sure, dude. I'm
man,
hoping to be over that way, so it'd be great to link up and hang out, have a beer for sure.